Yeah, and some of that's personality style too, I think. I tend to be more of an introspective person my own self. And so if you put me on the spot, like if I'm in a room of people, what we've talked about in my bio, where you talked about my time that I served on the board of directors, I tend to be a very introspective person. And so if a question is thrown out, I have to think about it for a second
Mhm.
because I'm the kind of person that I want to weigh out my opinion.
Mhm.
Do I think 100% this way? Do I think 100% that way? How do I think? And so if the question is thrown out and you want me to be the first person to answer it, that's challenging for me. Not because I don't have an opinion, but it takes me a minute to formulate one.
Mhm.
And so and that would just be a characteristic trait of me that I'm very introspective. And so I want to think about it, pick my words accordingly, and make sure that I say it the right way. I don't want to just talk off the top of my head when the topic's really important. And so there's that too. I mean, that plays into it as well.
Mhm.
But I do think that a lot of finding your voice, especially if you've come out of an abusive scenario, a lot of it really does have to do with your sense of esteem, your sense of self-worth. And can I confidently say things because I have the right to say things? And if you've been told for any length of time that you're stupid, nobody's going to believe you when you talk. You're inept, you're incapable, you're stupid. I mean, that's the word that people are told over and over and over again. Why would somebody want my opinion then? Because unfortunately, the way that our minds are equipped, and I don't understand it, but the way our minds are equipped, for some reason, in my experience, I watch people readily receive negative messages about themselves and readily refute positive messages about themselves. And so, for whatever reason, where that esteem factor is, people tend to want to believe the negative stuff you say about me. So, one of the best things that we can do, and one of the first steps we have to make when we're talking about finding a voice, is finding our self confidence, finding our self worth, having the ability to validate ourselves, knowing that pick the topic. And if this is a topic that I'm comfortable with, I absolutely have things to say, and they are of value, and they are good, and they are correct. But if you've told me that I'm stupid and I believe that, all that knowledge is going to sit inside of me because I don't feel like I can say it out loud.
Mhm.
So, I mean, there's finding a voice, I think, goes hand in hand with building self worth. And I don't think they can't be exclusive of each other in any way. Because the more confident you become, the more you have an opinion
Yeah.
and the more you're willing to share it.
Mhm. Because there are a lot of things that I do have a very strong opinion about, and I will
Mhm.
share that. Yeah. That's really good what you were talking about. And I see how it factored into my parenting or my inability to parent.
Mhm.
Um, too many times I let the kids call the shots simply
Mhm.
because I didn't know how to do this. I
Mhm.
was the youngest, and even when my mom remarried, I was still the youngest. So there was never anybody younger than me that I got to practice on. And because of that, I didn't have the confidence to babysit. I think my daughter was the maybe the third diaper I ever changed, literally. And so raising children, dealing with misbehavior and choices that they made and that kind of thing, I literally did not know what I was doing.
Yeah.
So that factored in too of not being able to do boundaries with the kids. And I know I'm bouncing all over the place with
No,
topics, but
because there's a lot to be said even on that, because the best parenting is raising your children to understand and respect you. Believe that they must respect you. Now, you don't have to be a dictator and you don't have to be angry and mad and all of those things, but raising children to respect you, that you're the bottom line.
mhm,
And so boundary setting is crucial, honestly, in that scenario, because a boundary is, if you don't do this, or if you do this, whatever the
mhm,
case may be, then I will do this, or
mhm,
I will not do this. But then really following through on that boundary is, then you do it. or you
Mm-hmm.
don't do it, whatever it is you said you were going to do.
Mm-hmm.
So when you've come out of an abusive situation where, first of all, confrontation is challenging for you, you shy away from confrontation because it was not safe to be confrontational in an abusive relationship. As your children get older and you say you can't do that and they want to push back, that's a confrontation.
Yeah.
And so is it easier as a parent to shirk away from that and just let them do whatever? Maybe. But then the consequence of that, the unintended consequence of that, is they lose a little bit of respect for you that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so you get to the place where the kids are telling the parent what to do,
Yeah.
and the parent's flailing, honestly.
Mm-hmm. True. That just answered right there a bunch of questions for me. So that was good.
Well, and I'm in no way, I have one child, and in no way would I ever suspect for 1 second that I'm a perfect parent, because we all make mistakes.
Right.
But I do know that, I don't know how I did it. I can't give you a play-by-play, but I know that my son is a child, a baby moving into a toddler, moving into a young child, moving into a teenager, never lost respect for me, because he knew that if this is what's going to happen, this is what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not going to tell you he didn't push back, as he got older, he didn't want to argue about it or whatever else. But the one thing that I'm super proud of that I was able to do in raising my child is, there's consequences to the choices that you make. Sometimes the choices are great choices, and so there's fun consequences. And sometimes the choices aren't so good, and there's not necessarily fun consequences as a result of that. But I use those not so fun times sometimes to also teach my son the concept of grace. And so, if you didn't do this thing, this is the consequence that you pay.
Mm-hmm.
And so the next time it happens, you didn't do this thing, you should have this consequence. But I would say, but guess what I'm going to do today? Today I'm going to exercise my right to give you grace. And what grace means is, even though this is the consequence you deserve, I'm not going to do that today. And I think that I really like the fact that I was able to do that with my son.
Mm-hmm.
It was, for me, trying to parent from a Christian principle. That's kind of where I came from. And so it was a really good way for me to kind of teach God's grace to us and everything else. But when it was all said and done, even though I did do that sometimes, it was always referenced in those terms. And so he knew, if mom says this is what's going to happen, it was going to happen.
That's good.
So, he just said to me recently, "You were so tough." And I'm like, "No, I really wasn't." You say that. He likes to pick on me and say things like that, but he didn't have too rough a childhood.
I'm sure that you two had a lot of fun.
We did.
Yeah,
Yeah, we did.
I can see that.
But I do think when you're coming out of that type of a situation where you were raised in an abusive household and you move from an abusive household into a marital abusive household, setting boundaries and confrontation, even with your children and everything else, is super challenging,
Mm-hmm.
because you don't necessarily have the healthiest mindset towards it, because you haven't been taught, as a child, you weren't taught
Mm-hmm.
healthy skills. Moving into a marital relationship with someone who didn't have healthy skills.
Right.
So that does make it challenging.
It was, and there are still, it's not as often as it used to be, but there are still lots of nights where I have had dreams about these out of control children that will not listen. Well, why wouldn't they listen? I mean, I did not know how to put those boundaries down. I did not know how to carry out the boundaries I did put down. So that's making a lot of sense. And I don't have those dreams as much very often. It's pretty rare. But when I do have them, sometimes I can see the growth in myself. And we've talked about that before with the psychologist that I saw.
Sure.
Yeah. And so that is encouraging to me, because I do have care of my grandchildren once in a while. And so again, I'm seeing a little bit of growth there, because I can lay down. Now I can see how to lay down good boundaries, but I'm still learning that. It's still not something that comes totally natural to me.
Sure. But then you talk about when you were raising your children, if your children watched your ex-husband devalue and demean you, why wouldn't they do the same thing? I mean, there's that too. And so I'm not saying it's all the abusive person's fault, but let's put the guilt where the guilt lays. And honestly, there is a lot of that there. Like if children watch the relationship between their parents, and so coming out of that abusive situation, if you were devalued and demeaned, degraded, all of those D words, your children saw that too. And so that's a really powerful lesson. I think children pay very close attention to the way that parents treat each other.
Mm-hmm. That's for sure.
And then the other thing is, and I've seen this happen a lot, people coming out of abusive relationships, and we talk about like children in abusive relationships and support groups and things like that. And we see a lot of mothers trying to establish rules or boundaries or consequences or whatever else. And then the abuser comes along and says, you're not going to do that. That's not going to happen. You can't do that. You know, I've even heard stories as simple as I told them no TV tonight. And sure enough, he walked right in and he turned on the TV and said they can watch TV if they want to. Now, when you're a kid, whose side are you on in that scenario?
Oh, Dad,
Because you're a
turn on the
kid. Because
TV.
you're a kid. You
Yep.
don't, you know,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to get what I want.
Mm-hmm.
But that further just confirms to that child what mom has to say is not nearly as important as what dad has to say.
Mm-hmm.
And it's nearly, you're being set up for a nearly impossible scenario of rearing your children.
Yeah.
Because in addition to trying to establish some type of boundary or whatever with them, you've got an abuser saying you don't have to do that.
Yeah.
So it's like beating your head against the wall.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's very true.
So, I mean, that needs to be put into perspective too.
Thank you. Yeah.
So back to finding your voice, again, I still think it's a matter of giving it a shot, trying it out, trying it in safe spaces, kind of picking and choosing what it is that you're going to weigh in on and what it is that you're not. You know, if it's something that you're very impassioned about and you're in a safe space, try to be impassioned and see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
I think we typically find out that it's okay. We just, you know, we need to sometimes taking that first step is the hardest step to take.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you do, you're like, oh yeah, I can walk this track, or I can walk that mile, I can walk that hill, because that first step was the hardest and I survived it. But building confidence doesn't just happen overnight. It's a trial and error and trial and repeat and trial and fail and try and repeat over and over again.
Good point. That's good.
But everybody has everybody has their own thing, the thing that kind of holds them back in certain situations. What, you know, whether it's some people will refuse to talk about politics or some people will refuse to talk about religion. Everybody has their own comfort zone and their own out of comfort zone. And so it's the times when we find ourselves in our comfort zone that I feel like we really need to exercise whatever it is we're trying to learn the most.
Mm-hmm.
Because in your comfort zone, you can kind of say what you say.
Yeah.
And, you know, then you'll find out, is that acceptable? Was that received well? Do people laugh at me? You know, whatever it is. But I think we need to get to that point in life where it doesn't matter to me how people respond to what I say. I have the right to have an opinion.
Yeah.
And whether you look funny at me or whether you get angry or whether you laugh at me or whether you tell me to shut up or whether you agree with me and whether you think I'm awesome, doesn't matter, because I have the right to have a voice.
And I have seen myself grow in that. There was something that came up a few years ago in a conversation, and my son brought it up, and I said, well, you know, I don't really care what people think about that. And he said, oh, is that where I get that from? I said, yeah, I guess it is. But I do want to grow in that, to that point, that I don't care what anybody else thinks.
And that's the thing, you know, I try to say what I say with love.
Mm-hmm.
I try to say what I say with respect. I try to say what I say with understanding. But the bottom line is, I still have the right to say what I say.
Mm-hmm.
And if you disagree with me, that doesn't break me. You have the right to disagree with me. And so if I'm going to say something expecting the clouds to part or the angels to sing, and that doesn't happen, and so I shrink back into myself, the clouds don't part and the angels don't sing. I mean, that's just the way that's going to be, and that's okay. Like, I still have the right to say something. And sometimes I say something and I will say, well, that was stupid. I don't judge myself that way.
Yeah.
You know, I am the kind of person that I do practice what I preach. Like, I do esteem myself from the inside out. And so what you think of me isn't going to break me. If you think I'm awesome, it's a bonus, but it's not going to break me if you don't think I'm awesome. And so if you think what I said was the stupidest thing you've ever heard, that's not going to break me either.
And that brings up something that I don't know if we want to do, maybe continue this and do another episode and just talk on this next thing I'm going to ask you about. When I was in school, especially, of course, junior high, that I'm from back that in that generation where it was junior high and not middle school.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a tough time anyhow.
Yes.
But there were a few kids, and I can sit here right now and give you their first name and last name. I mean, they made that big of an impact on me. They had such self-confidence, and it wasn't pride. They literally were self-confident. And I think back, they had really good family of origin. And I really believe they were everything that I had ever seen of them. And I knew their parents. And there's a couple of kids right now that I'm thinking of, particularly loving people, genuine, kind. And if what I saw was carried out in the home, then I'm sure those kids did have the ability to speak their mind in a respectful way. And is that the origin of confidence or self-confidence? Because it was just something that totally eluded me. It was like if somebody were to speak to me in a foreign language, I wouldn't have a clue what they were saying. That's what self-confidence that I saw in other people was to me. I had no point of reference for that whatsoever.
Even in a child, the origin of self-confidence is on the inside. But as parents, we try, what I hear you saying in that scenario, as parents, they try to cultivate a relationship with their kids where their kids felt like what they had to say was important,
Mm-hmm.
or they did have a voice and the parents listened. I mean, that's the biggest thing that we can do for children as parents is listen to them. Listen to them and the little things, because then they'll bring you the big things. And so that's one of the most important things we can do. But then what our children learn is when they're talking and we listen, what they have to say is important. So that encourages them to keep talking.
Mm-hmm.
If when a child is in a home and they talk and they're told to sit down and shut up, or they're told, children should be seen and not heard, or they're told go to your room, or I'm trying to watch TV, be quiet, or whatever it is, then they're taught that what they have to say isn't important.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would venture to guess the kids you're talking about were raised in a home environment where what they had to say was important, regardless of what it was.
Mm-hmm.
And so then the older they get, they have deeper conversations and they say more things if the parents are still willing to listen and support. And I would venture to guess even the older they got, parents would argue with them from time to time. I don't agree with that opinion, or that's not okay, or whatever else. But the kids still had a voice to say back, this is why I think this, or this is why I think that.
Mm-hmm.
And so we do set the tone, I think, for our kids in our home environments like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still, even little children, we esteem ourselves from the inside out.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you're talking to a 3 or 4-year-old and mom says, oh, you're so handsome, or you're so smart. That's where they start to build that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, our parents do play a role in saying those things to us, and we receive them, and that feels good that you think that. So I'll start saying that about me too. And so that's how we teach our kids to have that sense of self-confidence, is we say those things to them, then they start saying them. I am smart, or I am fun, or whatever. And so then there you go. That's the lesson. We esteem ourselves from the inside out. So I used to have this running dialogue, these 5 or 6 things that I would say to my son every single night before he went to bed. You're smart, you're handsome, you're funny, all of those things. That's why I let, I'd say, this is why I love you. And, sometimes I would add other things into the list, but then I would say to him, now, do you know why I love you? And he would say, yes, because I'm smart and because I'm funny and because I'm kind, or whatever else. And so he would repeat those things. And then those things became part of who he was.
Mm-hmm.
I would guarantee you, those kids that you're thinking of, that's the environment they were raised in.
I really believe they were. And then something else I was thinking of when you were talking, I really believe their parents spent time with them. And to a kid, love is spelled Time.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, then I really feel like they knew that they were important. It validated what everything else that the parents had been saying all along.
Mm-hmm.
It,
You just made me think of something, and it's a silly story, but I like to share silly stories, so here I go. I have a twin sister,
uh-huh.
so we were 7. And so in my family of origin, the 5 of us, I had an older brother, mom and dad, me and my sister, we would sit down and have family dinner every night. That was the rule. And so and as a result of that, there's family conversation. Like, that's one of the ways that my parents checked in on us kids. And, we had that conversation. There's one night where there's a lively conversation going on at the table, and 7-year-old me was trying to say something and trying to say something. And somebody kept talking over the top of me and nobody was listening. And I was trying to say something and nobody was listening. So I stood up, I turned my chair around, and I looked at the wall and I started talking to the wall.